This is Ben from Goatwhore, and you're watching Richard Metal Fan.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Richard Metal Fan Interviews. This is episode number 137. And today's guest, we're talking to Ben Falgoust. Ben is the lead vocalist for the band Goatwhore, an extreme metal band from New Orleans, Louisiana. And he also plays in another band called Soylent Green. Today we're going to be talking to him about what got him into metal, what made him want to be a vocalist, as well as going through his discography. So without further ado, let's go talk to Ben. So what's up, guys? I'm here with Ben Falgoust from Goatwhore and also Soylent Green. So how are you doing today, Ben?
Pretty good, pretty good.
It's so awesome to have you here. So kind of like the format is, I want to do like a rundown of your catalog as well as talk about like your history as an artist from where you started to where you are today. But let me take you back to like young Ben Falgoust. So what were like the first bands that got you into metal and what made you want to be a vocalist?
Uh, that's a bunch of different things when I was younger, ranging from, things like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, stuff like that, Venom, Celtic Frost, onward to like Napalm Death, Cannibal Corpse, it was a mixture of things going down the lines, And then also, at younger points in my life, I was uh instead of being more open, I got locked into things. Like I was like locked into death metal or locked into black metal at one point, or grindcore and things like that. But then as time progressed, I opened up more to a lot more things and started to pull them all in and utilize them in like influences and stuff like that. And then I think as time goes on too, sometimes you revisit some of your older influences and sometimes you have newer influences that kind of step into the realm a bit. And then, from that point, you just, you build off of different things. And like I said, like sometimes the past comes back up again. Sometimes you revisit older stuff you listened to when you were a kid and you hear it in a different light. And all of a sudden it gives you a different kind of like influence as well. So, throughout the duration of all that time was a lot of different shifts going on within like the styles of metal and things that I was listening to. And then I was branching off on other stuff like Pink Floyd and, kind of things like that. And like CCR, John Fogerty, there was a lot of different things. You start to kind of get to a point where you heard other styles of music and it caught your attention and you found some kind of element into it. And then it became some sort of influence in a way down the line. So it's definitely like a life journey roller coaster of a lot of different elements that have been there, but mostly mostly metal, mostly extreme metal at that.
Awesome. And so from what I saw on your page on Metal Archives, I believe that your first band was Flesh Parade, or was it Paralysis? Like I was just curious, like which one of them was first?
Okay, so I was never in Flesh Parade. I keep seeing that come up, but
Yeah.
I was in a band with some people that were involved with Flesh Parade.
Right.
So maybe there was some kind of mix up there. But the first band I was in was Paralysis. And it was like a straightforward, like meat and potatoes death metal band, with some other little elements in there, but mostly like straightforward death metal.
Yeah.
And then from there, I got into Soylent Green. And from
Yeah.
there, I got into Goatwhore, and I was kind of at one point, I was doing Soylent Green and Goatwhore at the same time and just kind of bouncing back and forth when, that was a younger me where it was like the ability to be able to do that was a lot easier because of time restraints and, certain things that, you get older and you have more responsibilities and they kind of get in the way in a sense.
Yeah. And I know there's also other older bands. There's also Hangnail, where he did like a 92 demo, and another band called Suicide War. Or like I'm always curious about those bands.
Yeah, I never did the Suicide War thing. I never did actually do anything on. It was like talked about, and our good friend Frey, he was a guy. He played guitar. He did some teching for like Crowbar, and he played guitar and he wrote some things. And I think he had Kirk sing on a track, but it never, it never took off. I was really busy with like Goatwhore and Solent at the time, so I really didn't have any time to do anything for that. Hangnail was a band I did with it was Todd that played drums, that plays drums in Flesh Parade, and Mike Hiles who played guitar in Mule Skinner. And we just kind of did some like blast stuff, like some really quick grindcore type songs and stuff like that. And we just did like a little demo.
All right. And then how did you get to join Soylent Green? Because I know they formed in 1988 and then you joined in 93. How'd you end up hooking up with those guys?
It was I was kind of a friend with them, and then like also when they would go out and do shows like in the Texas area, I would help them like get out there to play the show, and I kind of go out to the shows with them out of the area. And then I was in Paralysis at the same time as well, and they got to a point where there was some kind of situation with their singer at the time, and they kind of parted ways. And then they offered me to come into the band, and I really liked the stuff that they were doing. It was really diverse. The thing about Soylent was, at that time period when Soylent was going on, it was a really obscure kind of thing. It was like because it's a mixture of like grindcore, death metal, like the best way I can say it was like it reminds me of like Leonard Skinner meets Napalm Death, and with
Wow.
like a blues element to it.
Yeah.
So it was really diverse in that kind of element. And then at that early stage too, that was when Brian kind of got involved with I Hate God as well,
Yeah.
and he started playing with them. So Brian was doing like a split duty with Soylent Green and I Hate God.
Yeah. And tell me about like that first
But
song. Yeah, you
so
were saying.
yeah, so it was a thing. I was still kind of in Paralysis when I jumped over to Solent, and then Solent just started doing more things, and I kind of went in that direction a little more. And Paralysis kind of disbanded, and some of the other members. It's crazy because at one point, Tony White, who played guitar in Paralysis with me, he ended up getting in Solent like around the Confrontation album. He played on that record. And it was funny how that like came full circle. Me and him kind of got back together in a band for a small period of time.
Yeah, small
So,
world.
yeah, I mean the scene here is fairly small. It's not really. I think it's generational in a sense because now we have so many like newer bands out there in the scene and younger people, and it's like evolving into something a little bit different, which is really cool. Where when I was growing up, there was like this certain lot of people, age variances, but everyone kind of shared like the same kind of idea music style wise. I mean, when I did Paralysis, it was kind of like the black sheep kind of the scene because death metal wasn't like a big thing in this scene. That was like early stage. It was kind of like obscure. But Soylent Green kind of evolved because Soylent Green was always doing something weird and mixing up different elements of stuff. And so when death metal and grindcore started to root up, and like labels like Earache and Roadrunner and all that started putting things out, those elements started getting incorporated into Soylent Green a lot more. And that was even before I got into the band. They were dabbling in like mixing in those styles as well. But Paralysis was really obscure because you had a lot of bands like you had Crowbar, early stages of Crowbar, and then you had like what was before Crowbar, which was like Aftershock and Shell Shock, with like the evolution of what happened with Crowbar. And it was just, I mean, it was unique. That was definitely, there's a lot of things in this scene that have come out that were really unique on their own. From what Crowbar's done, what there was a band when I was younger called Graveyard Rodeo, and they had put out 2 releases through Century Media as well, and they were really obscure. Exhorter, and all like through all 3 of those right there were definitely different from each other. And then we had sort of a death metalish kind of band when I was younger too called Incubus, and it was a 3-piece, and it was 2 brothers in the band that were from like I think they were from Brazil, and or somewhere in South America for sure. But they, I came across a lot of more extreme metal through like being involved, like listening to Incubus as well, because people that knew them were into like more like obscure stuff, like earlier Sodom and things like that.
Yeah.
So I kind of learned about some things being involved with the scene with that as well.
Yeah.
And you know, there was always different things going on. I've always been rooted. Like I said, I was locked into things at points, but I was always really open
Yeah.
about, well, what's this? Well, what's this? You know, I went to a record store. I'd see a record. Like I remember when I first discovered Napalm Death, there was the record. It was From Enslavement to Obliteration, and it was in its wrapper, and written on the wrapper was "Fastest Band in the World" with a question mark. And I was like, that's insane, because I loved the speed element and like speed metal, you know, thrash metal, quicker kind of like extreme metal. So
Yeah.
it caught my attention, and you know, I bought it and I bought it home. And actually, that's how I discovered that band Dead Horse from Houston too, because I would go to Houston to go see shows because there was a lot of shows that skipped New Orleans. So me and some friends would get together and we drive out to Houston. We go see shows. We went and saw like Morbid Angel in the early days, like in between like Altars of Madness and Blessed Are the Sick, and
Wow.
Carcass, Pestilence. There's like all kinds of bands we went out to Houston to go see when we were young. And we've seen some things here, but there was not a lot of shows that would come here. And there was a lot of times it was shows that were usually at like VFW halls or American Legion halls here when I was a kid. And that's, you know, like I saw Agnostic Front when I was a kid at like a VFW hall. I remember the early days of like Corrosion of Conformity. I would see them at a VFW hall when I was growing up, you know. So that, some of the places growing up, they weren't like big venues. I mean, we had a place called Storyville Jazz Hall, and that's where I saw like bands like Creator, Corner, DRI, you know, Suicidal Tendencies, things like that. So we had one like maybe one or two like bigger venues, but most of the time it was usually at like VFW halls or American Legion halls. And even as like when I was in Paralysis and we were younger, we would rent out halls to put on shows too. So that wasn't like an obscure thing. Like we would do it to do shows. And then sometimes a promoter would rent an American Legion hall or VFW hall to put on a show of, you know, whoever the big band was coming through. I saw Cro-Mags and Destruction when I was a kid at like an American Legion hall.
Nice.
So yeah, there was a lot of things. It's cool. It's like when nowadays, every now and then you do, you know, you'll play a smaller town somewhere and it's at some kind of like VFW hall or some kind of like element like that. And it's really cool because it brings back a lot of memories from when I was young.
Yeah. And kind of like going into that first Soylent Green album, Pussy Soul, I love that. Then I know, like you mentioned, like you have like the different elements. Like I describe it as almost like hardcore with a little bit of the sludgy element. Man, was that kind of like the mind frame going into like making the first Soylent Green album?
It's the thing about it was like, yeah, okay, so there's definitely like sludgy, there's definitely like grindcore shit. There's definitely like hardcore stuff. Like I said, song was really mixed. There was a lot of things going on there. You know, Brian and Donovan, the two guitar players, listened to all kinds of different things, so they would blend all these different ideas. You know, and then you know they had Tommy as a drummer who was just insane. Like he was like that guy you rolled in, and he had the huge kit, two kicks, four toms, floor tom, all these cymbals, you know. And usually when you go play a show, you know, the sound guy's like, "Are you even using all that?" It's like, yeah, this dude uses every part of this kit, you know. So it was like you took this metal drummer who was like really fucking good, and then you threw these two guitar players and a bass player who equally had all this crazy stuff that he was into, and they all just threw all these things together, threw it at the drummer, and then boom, this is what you got, you know. And it was like, put a blast beat to this, even though it doesn't sound like it needs a blast beat, put a blast beat to it. All right, slow
Because why
that
not?
down. Uh-huh.
Yeah, because why not? You need more
Yeah, because
blast
why
beats.
not? Just do it, you know. Oh, it's a bluesy sounding riff, but put a blast beat to it. You know what
Yeah,
I'm saying?
makes it
So,
better.
yeah, yeah. It was just any like possibility, you know, and not just that. It wasn't some. I have to say, it wasn't just like a throw, like cut and paste, throw everything everywhere either, because those dudes are generally like really good songwriters. You know, they were really good. They had things planned out in their heads, even though it seemed like at first you're like, where's this come from? Where's all this stuff go? And I liked being involved with that band because it actually pushed me to other realms to try to do other things. And that's why I used a lot of different like vocal styles with it, because it was really variant. And if I just kept one style to it, it really just wouldn't open up everything else like how it was. And using different vocal styles allowed me that ability to be a little diverse and kind of go after things different.
Awesome. And then kind of going into like of course 1998. I know you did like the String of Lies EP. Was that like something to hold people over before you did Stone Mouth Secrets?
Well, yeah. Well, we had the thing about it was okay. So we had Pussy Soul, and then we we had a bunch of new material, but we were kind of like in that middle point without a label at the time. And then we recorded that stuff. We said, okay, let's record this like EP thing, and we did it. And Relapse Records was really interested, and we're like, well, we have more material, and we can do a record. And they're like, well, let's put out this EP of it, and that was a thing then. It wasn't really like anything odd. There was a lot of bands that just did. They either did like 7-inch records or they did EPs like on a tape or whatever, or CD, whatever was going on at the time. So it wasn't odd. And I guess too, maybe it's a thing. Maybe it was a thing with labels like then, especially like more obscure labels like Relapse at that time, to just kind of throw things out there and see how people attack it, and then say, all right, well, we're going to do something big now. And so we had the material there, and we were like, let's do these songs. And then it was like, all right, well, let's do a full length record. And then that's how the whole Soul Mouth Secrets thing came about.
Yeah, I just think it's a pretty good album. Like I almost has like the definitely grindcore core elements, like and like different elements on that album, like especially the intro of Build Fear. It has a very good bluesy melody. Then it just goes into just sick blast beats, and then Looking Through Nails has like a sick breakdown. Like everything about it is just great. Like I feel like it's just an amalgamation of like different styles of rock and metal and everything.
Yeah. I think at that point, like with Solent too, like going from before Pussy Soul up to Pussy Soul, and then in that middle point, I think like after Pussy Soul, that they started to become more like critical about how everything flowed within a song. You know, like they started to become better writers for sure. The evolution was there. It's I think it's a natural thing. Like if you're a musician and you just as you go along, the evolution is just like a thing that's going to happen no matter what, and you're going to move forward, and your influences come in from everywhere. And like I said, the guys that they had, Brian was into a lot of like bluesy stuff, but he was into like noise stuff. He was into Boredoms. He was into Naked City, John Zorn, but then he was into like all kinds of different like blues stuff, and so he'd blend that into all of it. So I think at that point, everybody was more on like the same path of everybody had their little piece in Solent, but everybody was on that same path of what Solent was going to be doing. It
Right.
wasn't like as scattered like the past was.
Yeah, and it's hard to believe that this year is also the 25th anniversary of that album. Like, how do you feel about it now, 25 years later?
Yeah, I feel old. No,
Yeah, I mean, I was 4 years old when that came out, so I wasn't even in the metal yet.
yeah. No, I mean it's awesome. It's awesome to stop and like look back and be like, from everything I've done, with Solent, with Paralysis, with Goatwhore, and look back and be like, wow, this is really cool. That I was involved with these things at some point in time. I never have any like disdain towards any of the stuff I did in the past, because I always feel like it's like part of your like part of your evolution, part of your like growing cycle.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it shows a part of you at that time. And then later on, you can see what happens with you, whether influences shift a bunch or you kind of stay on the same kind of path a little bit, or you evolve as a individual, or you mature more as an adult and you kind of see things, or your perspective on it's a little different within music. And it's cool because it's a point in time. I know I've read interviews and seen interviews with bands, and they talk down on their past stuff. It's just like, don't ever do that. That's like, I
Yeah.
think it's crucial. It's a
Yeah.
point. It's definitely a point
It
that
makes you
shows
what
where
you
you
are,
were
who
at a
you
time.
are.
Yeah, yeah. And not only that, like let's take a band like Entombed, okay? Like
Yes.
those dudes were young as hell when they put out Left Hand Path, and that record kills. I can't. It's like
Amazing
them
album.
saying now, well, we were kind of like immature then. It was like it doesn't matter. It's still fucking killed, especially for the time period and your age. That's fucking amazing. This record was totally ripping. And I think sometimes that element too, the naiveness and just being on that trail of like, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna write some sick shit. We're just gonna put it out. Sometimes that whole like just go after thing is better than locking yourself into something and trying to focus on it too much.
Yeah. And
And I
around
think
that,
that's what's cool about a lot of younger records, you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, and I think also around that time, like you actually had started up Goatwhore. So how'd you get to know like Sammy and everybody in the band at that time?
I met Sammy briefly a couple of times when saw and played with Acid Bath a couple of times.
Yeah.
And we kind of crossed paths here and there. And then later on, when he was doing Goatwhore, I actually got into Goatwhore because he he got into a fight, some kind of like brawl fight broke out at a bar in Baton Rouge, and he got his jaw broken,
Oh
and he
shit.
had to get his jaw wired shut. And so I liked the stuff that they were doing, because I was into like black metal and stuff at that time as well. And I said, "Hey, if you'd like, I know you have some shows coming up. I'll fill in and help out, until everything's good with your jaw." And so I said, "Yeah," and we did it. And then when he healed up, we were just like, "Just stay in the band, we'll move it from there." And that's how it ended up going. Just keep going as it is.
Awesome. And tell me about like that first demo, Serenades to the Blades of Blood. It's very raw sounding. Was that like something to like send out to labels to get signed?
It was just a demo, like I mean, that's just what you did. I mean, bands still do it. It's just different now. A lot of well, I mean, bands are trying to find tapes and put things on tape now, so it's kind of coming back full circle again. But I mean, that was the thing when you like now bands, put their stuff on like Bandcamp or something like that, and put stuff all over social media, online, try to get noticed. And back then it was tapes because you would mail tapes to other people and you would trade tapes to hear other different obscure bands. And that's how your name got around. That's how you pushed your band. You didn't have like the internet or anything. So you recorded a demo and you got it out there. You had some friends you wrote with across the pond, in Europe somewhere, and you traded tapes and you said, "Hey, I'm in this band. I'm gonna send this over to you," and then they would send it to other friends, and then that's how the word would spread. And then maybe a label came across it, and then they were interested. But the thing with Goatwhore was Sammy was in a deal with Rotten Records
Yeah.
for Acid Bath, and basically after Acid Bath disbanded and everything, that label reached out and was like they were interested in pursuing Sammy's other project per se, just like they even pursued Dax and Mike with Agents of Oblivion. So that was their thing. They were just grabbing his anything from like the Acid Bath reminiscences they possibly could and just get it out there.
Yeah. And tell me about like that first album, The Eclipse of Ages into Black. I think it's a pretty solid debut. What was like the thought process making the debut Goatwhore album?
It's okay. So the demo, because there's stuff on there that's on the demo. Okay, pretty
Is
much a good portion of it
is it
is
like
from the demo.
re-recorded stuff or just the actual demo
Yeah,
songs?
yeah, yeah. It's all that whole thing. That's a whole different recording process because the demo we did, it was this little like shack place. It was a studio. It was like on. Oh, how do I say this? Like we didn't. There wasn't a lot of money to be had, you know, with doing this stuff. So we had to get whatever little money we had together and just find somebody that might have had some studio or some pieces of stuff to be able to record on. And that's when we did Serenades. It was some guys, I think Sammy knew that played in a band, and one of the guys had some money and he had bought some recording gear. And so that's how we did the demo. And
Yeah.
then we did that record. We did that record at Festival Recording Studio, where Soylent did Soul Mouth Secrets. Acid Bath did, I think Acid Bath did one of their records there. And then I think Crowbar did some stuff there. A few bands recorded there. And so we did the Goatwhore record, Eclipse of Ages into Black there.
Yeah, I just think it's a great
And
album.
that was like, well, that was definitely Goatwhore's first time into like a pro studio per se. You know, like it had like its isolation rooms, the main mixing room, and stuff like that. So that was like the first actual like studio thing that we did as Goatwhore, was Eclipse of Ages into Black.
Yeah, and I still think it's a great, very underrated debut album, just in metal in general. Like, I feel like it's clearly black metal and influenced by sort of like its Norwegian counterparts, but I feel like you also add like your own little twist to the genre. Like, it has that black metal feels, but also the guitar and the drumming definitely has like that death metal influence on there.
Yeah. No, I think, I think Eclipse definitely has, it's more rooted in black metal, but when I say black metal too, I'm kind of like covering the terrain of like the earlier form of black metal, like Venom, Celtic Frost, Bathory. But then, you know, they had that whole new thing, like the whole new like Norwegian thing going on with like Emperor, Enslaved, and all these bands that were coming out. And I think it was a little like mixture of that because we were listening to all of that kind of stuff, you know, and then like Dark Throne and, you know, bands like that. And those elements were kind of just blending because we were just listening to all these different variations of stuff that we were into as far as like black metal goes. And then we also still had our own personal little influences of like death metal and stuff like that. And I think that's what ended up blending in there as well.
Yeah, and I love your voice on that album. Like you have like more of kind of like a raspier, kind of like throaty sound. And one thing I love is like the song "Lair of Nastron." And you sort of have a very kind of like haunting vocal style. And another, and especially on another song like "As the Reflection Slowly Fades," like it's just really.
Yeah. So that vocal style was a huge influence of like Tom G. Warrior from like Into the Pandemonium era.
Yeah.
Because he had more of those like, he did those kind of like moaning kind of vocals on Into the Pandemonium. And I loved Into the Pandemonium. You know, when I got it, I was like, I love this record. You know, that's the thing about Celtic Frost that I always like. I'll sit here and I'll go back to it, and it trips me out because they have been so influential, like across numerous genres within extreme music, from
Yeah.
like black metal to death metal to doom metal. You know, they've influenced so much. It's really fucking crazy. And
Yeah.
I mean, I remember like being younger, like I was really into Paradise Lost, and I remember
Great
reading an
band.
article. Huh?
I say
Yeah,
great
they're
band.
phenomenal.
Saw them in
And
Vegas last year.
oh, lucky
Yeah.
dude. um, they when they put out Gothic, they were talking about how Into the Pandemonium was a huge influence of theirs. And I was like, that's fucking awesome. I love that record, you know? But that's what I'm saying. So you have like a band like Paradise Lost, who was influenced by Into the Pandemonium. And then you have a band like Obituary for death metal, who was influenced by earlier records like Emperor's Return, Morbid Tales, things like that. And you know, it's like, holy shit, they're going across like numerous little like subgenres within extreme metal, you know, as far as their influence goes. But that whole style came from that element of like Into the Pandemonium, like Tom G's like moaning vocals, you know.
Yeah. And then kind of like going back to Soylent Green, I know in 2001 you did a deleted symphony for the Beaten Down. Tell me about that. And I saw like an interesting, apparently the original title for the album was The Devil Wears a Lamb Skin. I'm always curious, what was the reason for the title change?
You know what? It's crazy because I don't even know how that got out, because we were discussing titles for records and we talked about it. I don't know if we mentioned to the label at the time, like if we told Relapse, we have this idea, but it's not in stone, and somebody at the label put it into the system. but then when we handed it in, they try to switch. I don't really know what happened, but it's funny because I've looked up stuff and I see that every now and then. Like the devil wears a lambskin or whatever. It's just it's whatever it was. I can't remember what it was. But it's interesting that it was like a title that we were thinking about doing, but then we just blew it off and went to this other direction with it. But if for some reason it got into the system, so then it comes up in certain aspects.
Yeah. Yeah, and then kind of like going back in the Goatwhore in 2003, you did Funeral Dirge for the Rotting Sun, which I think is a pretty good follow up to the Eclipse of Ages into Black. So what was it like making this album?
That record was it was a really weird time too, because Sammy was going through some things, but I'd been in an accident where I broke both of my legs and both of my ankles,
Oh
and I was
shit.
in a wheelchair. And I was in the later stage of like finally being able to get out the wheelchair, and I had to wear like these boot things to start. I was in a wheelchair for like a year, and I was I had to wear these boot things to help me to start walk again. And so I had those, and I was slightly still in the wheelchair, and we were going in and we are going to go and do that record. And so a lot of the stuff, like the title really does like explain the idea behind that, like Funeral Dirge for a Rotting Sun. It was more of a dirgier record, more of a depressive kind of record
Yeah, it's very
as far as the
sludgy.
music. Yeah, yeah. As far as the music and everything goes. And then the lyrical content was really, really crazy because there was a lot of different elements of things. When I was in the hospital, I wrote a lot of weird stuff. When I was like coming off, like after coming out of a surgery, after being under, and I would be in the hospital healing up or whatever, because I spent a lot of time in the hospital as well afterwards, because I had to have I ended up having like 9 different surgeries for different stuff. And
Wow.
but I would, they put you under to have surgery, and then you'd come out and you'd have like weird dreams and all this stuff. So I would just write down all the different crazy shit I dreamed about and different aspects. And I was reading things at that time, and I would just blend all of those ideas together. Like if you read the one song on there, Baptized in the Storm of Swords, there's a
Yeah.
lot of like really, really odd, like pseudo medical type shit mixed in with like horror type stuff. And so it had like, that's what I'm saying, like all those things started to blend up in there, and it made it like a pretty odd record as far as the lyrics go.
Yeah. And hard to believe that this year is also the 20-year anniversary of this album. Like, I know. Sorry, I'm making you feel old, dude, but this still is
No,
a
it's
great
dude,
album.
it's fine. It's just a joke to say, that's what people when they get old, they say, damn, you make me feel old. But I mean, I still go out, we still doing records, I'm still out there. That if anything, that makes me feel young. You know what I'm saying? Like the ability to be able to still do this and present it to people. And it's cool because as we go along, people like yourself or anyone else who's younger, and they come across it and they're like, wow, what was this? Because Goatwhore is still, it's still kind of like an obscure thing within extreme metal. It's not, I mean, there's definitely stuff that's way more obscure than what we do, but it's not like per se like Lamb of God or Killswitch Engage or bands on that kind of tier. It's
Yeah.
definitely like lower, and it's you know within this style of music, it's not the easiest task in life, like holding a job when you're at home and then you leave for a while to go on the road, come back home, go back into a job to kind of work to keep, because there's just the money's just not there, especially as you get older and like say, you get a home or whatever, you have a apartment and you're not living with your parents anymore, and then you have all these extra bills to pay, so it changes a lot of stuff. So you have to do a lot of balancing act to make things happen and keep things going on with the road. And like I said, when I was in that accident, I was touring in a band, and I didn't have insurance, and that hit me really hard financially as well. Yeah.
And people are like, well, you didn't have insurance. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure bands out there now that are touring, a lot of the people don't have insurance. It's an extra cost that sometimes it gets in the way of doing what you need to do, even though I would say if you can get it because it's vital as hell after what I went through. But
Yeah.
it's sometimes it's not in the whole picture to be able to do it. You can't afford it on top of everything else that's going on.
Yeah, and I especially one of my favorite songs on here is Blood Guilt Eucharist, and you actually do a little bit of clean singing, and I think that's really interesting. Like it really kind of like adds like the atmosphere to this album, which you don't really hear much nowadays with on any Goatwhore album.
Yeah, I know. I kind of stepped away from that. No particular reason, I don't know why really. I just started going in other directions, and I started like focusing more on like how writing, like in the earlier albums, there was a lot more lyrics and a lot more vocals over music. And then as I went along, I wanted the music to breathe a little more. Like let the riff breathe a little more, let the listener hear the riff, and then come in and then drag the whole part in. So there was aspects that I started to like sink into and be like notice things, like listen to somebody like Judas Priest or something. You're like,
Yeah.
You hear the riff's just going, and then Halford jumps in, and then everything pulls together at that point. So I started getting more intrigued in the like actual like writing and that kind of essence. I mean, I know I don't do much like chorus, verse, chorus type stuff, and then like on the newer stuff, I've done a few things like it because I wanted to go into that field and try to add that into it, but it has never been like a thing that like if you listen to all the other songs, there's not much that repeats at all.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely try to get to the point, no bullshit.
Yeah.
All right. And then going back in the Soylent Green 2005, you did Confrontation. I love that album. Like, and I noticed you kind of like decided to change your vocals a little bit to kind of I don't know. It's just really interesting. Saying what was the reason for that? You wanted to try to like push yourself as a vocalist?
Yeah, I'm sometimes I'm not really sure. Sometimes I just get in there and I just do whatever feels comfortable at the time, and I think, I've always been, I have never been schooled vocally, I've never took any kind of course or anything. I never did anything. I just kind of, when I was younger, I liked death metal and I could do the Cookie Monster vocal. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to just go with this. But then as I moved along, I was like, wait, I can kind of control the tone of this. I can kind of try to do this. And then with Soul, like I said, it opened me up, like where I started to use more like the hardcore voice. I call it like the Joe Caper voice because we were really into the band called Righteous Pigs when we were young, and that's where that voice kind of like grew from. And so I have like the Joe Caper voice, and I have like the Cookie Monster voice, which is the death metal voice, and then I had the more high pitched thing, which was like reminiscent of like Napalm Death-ish kind of early kind of style type stuff, but then that evolved into like the black metal type screaming, and then and then evolved into like more like solid death metal type vocals. So it's always been like this little like process where things are shifting and changing, trying to see, where I was at, what I can do, how I can control this, experiment with things.
Okay. And then next up is Goatwhore with A Haunting Curse. I love this album. It has like very great production. So what was the thought process going into making this album?
So that was finally our departure from Rotten Records
Into
and
Metal
our
Blade.
relationship beginning with Metal Blade. Yes.
And how'd they find
And
Goatwhore?
it was funny because we were touring a bunch on Funeral Dirge, and we did a tour with Goatwhore, and that's how we came across the Metal Blade people.
Yeah.
And we were at the show, and they said, let's talk further about some things. And so, we left that show, and then down the line, we started to talk more about it, and then it led to us going into an agreement with them because our deal with Ron was only 2 records, and I think he wanted to do more, but Metal Blade was really interested, and we saw it as an opportunity to kind of move things ahead a little further. And so, everything was really great in the talks about, moving onward with Metal Blade. And then, so we did that record, and we had the opportunity to up the ante on like a studio. And we decided to go with Eric Rutan at Mana Studios in Florida.
Yeah.
And, try things out there, which we ended up using him numerous times for records. And even Solent used him for 2 records, So that's, we created a really cool relationship with him on that aspect. And I think the good thing about that is Eric has always been, I mean, everyone knows, Eric is in Morbid Angel. He's in Ripping Corpse in the early days. We all knew about Ripping Corpse when we were growing up, and we knew about him, getting into Morbid Angel, and then he had Hate Eternal. And it was just like, it was really cool to go there because it was somebody you looked up to as well. But not only that, he's definitely like,
yeah,
he's this person where it's like you could be scared about like saying, hey, I want this to sound like this, but he's really open. He's like, all right, well, tell me what you're looking for. Tell me how it was. And I think each record that we did, like with Goatwhore, got better and better because of him and us and our communication and how we were with each other, to be able to be like, well, let's try that. Let's not completely like say no to it just because that might not be the thing now or how things are done. Let's just try it. And if it doesn't work, we trash it. And if it works, then boom, we move forward with it. Yeah. And I think that was really cool in that aspect, that relationship grew and grew, and the ability to be able to communicate with each other on the level of, and he's an engineer. So when you go in there, a lot of us didn't know anything about shit. So it's like, we could go in there and say, no, that's not it. And he's like, dude, I'm the engineer and I'm doing the record. What are you talking about? So it was cool if you had an idea, but you didn't have knowledge how to like purvey it, and you gave it to him as best you could, and then you tried to sort it out. But he was willing to take it into consideration, which was really fucking cool. And like I said, that's why I think that relationship grew, because of that ability on both ends to be open about things. Like Sam even had certain ways he wanted to do things, and Eric kind of bent him a little bit, and they worked together. And plus, because they were both guitar players, they got along and discussed a lot of things, and, went through a lot of stuff and made sure, guitars were on point. The sound that was coming through was proper. So that whole relationship really worked out well. And Haunting Curse was basically the first step of that. There were some things, with Haunting Curse, like Sammy really wasn't happy with the guitar because we did have a lot of problems with guitar. Something happened. We got out there. He had to use one of Eric's guitars, and he didn't quite get the tone that, that is Sammy. Sammy has like a particular sound, like that he's kind of molded through time. And, it wasn't there yet. It'd kind of really be interesting if you could take like the guitar sound on Carving and put it on Haunting Curse.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because it would change. It would really change the element of a Haunting Curse. I feel like a Haunting Curse is definitely very it attacks a lot, and it's really quick in a lot of places, and it's got some interesting aspects where if the guitar sounded like it did on Carving, on Haunting, it would be totally fucking whacked.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and of course, love this album. Like, of course, with like Eric Rutan, because with the producer, so it's almost like the fifth member, or the sixth member of the band, or if you're in Slipknot, like the 10th member. But it definitely
No, it basically was. Yeah, it basically was like that. It was the thing about was he started to become part of it in the sense like that, because he was the engineer, he was the producer, but he was also like a friend at that point. Like once we were going in for Carving, especially me, because I'd already done a record with Solent with him, then I did a record with Goatwhore with him. And then, we're doing Carving and then doing another Solent record. And, it was like, there was a friend there too, somebody you were familiar with, and you went in and it was like, oh yeah, this is cool. It's comfortable. You walk in the studio, everything that's going on. You were staying right down the street from the studio. You knew what everything was like pretty much planned. You had it all set up. You knew how everything rolled,
All right.
And we did one of the Salt records, I think, was Real. Yeah. And then second one we couldn't do. And then Goatwhore we did Real. We did Real with Goatwhore, like 2-inch with Goatwhore on Vengeful Ascension. That was pretty crazy because as time went along, it became harder and harder to be able to do like a record on 2-inch.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like that relationship definitely helped out with those records, and the idea of the relationship and how everybody was very open to suggestions and trying things that normally wouldn't be tried, or somebody would be like, no way, this is my way, this is how it's going to go. There was like none of that. Everything was fairly open. And it was funny because sometimes we'd be there mixing, and so Eric would be there, and we'd want the guitars louder, and we'd slowly like reach over to the fader, and he goes, don't touch the faders, don't touch the faders. But we always like, Eric, the guitars need to come up, the guitars need to be pumped, they need to come ripping through. And that's like when you listen to Carving, how it like rips through, because Sammy was really disappointed what happened with Haunting, but a lot of it, like I said, a lot of it wasn't necessarily anyone's fault because of the circumstances that happened. Like there was something wrong with his guitar, the intonation, some kind of thing, and there was no means to get anything sorted. The time frame and wasn't there to make sure everything could get sorted out. So, he just used one of Eric's guitars, and he wasn't really comfortable on it because it wasn't his guitar. And he had to play all these songs and stuff like that. And he really wasn't into the tone because it wasn't his tone as well.
Yeah.
But when Carving hit, there was a main objective to chase that, since it didn't happen. And that's why on Carving, the guitars are like, they're like chainsaws. They just cut through, and they're lethal. And they're like, you can feel it when those guitars, like when they actually like chug and hit like full power chords. You can feel the essence of it.
Yeah. Just hold on one sec. I gotta turn on my light.
Yeah.
A little bit dark. All right. Sorry about that. Anyway, moving on to the last Soylent Green album you did, Inevitable Collapse in the Presence of Conviction. I think it's a pretty good album. Tell me about that. I just love how it just starts off very bluesy, then it just picks right up with the grindcore. It kind of like I would call it like the surprise album, I would say.
Yeah. No, I really love that record. I feel like someone had been through a lot of things, because like I was telling you, I was in a wheelchair for like a year because Soylent was in a really bad accident, and that's how I got injured. We were on tour and we got in a really bad vehicle accident on the interstate. And I ended up in the hospital for like 3 weeks up in Chicago, got transferred down to New Orleans, whatever. But outside of that, and then also like there was the time before that where we were out on it was Morbid Angel, Deicide, Soylent, Zyklon, and Exhume, and we flipped and wrecked the van in the snow.
Jeez.
So we had a lot of bad things that like kind of happened within Soylent that were pretty rough, and it kind of changed some elements internally. Members left, things happened. People had, a few like substance abuse issues here and there. So there was a lot of like really bad karma in Soylent. So it was hard to do things. And I think that, writing, it reflected on writing and everything, and influenced things within our writing, influenced things within the lyrics. And then I think by the point when we got to Inevitable Collapse was everything started to like come back together, like Brian, Tommy, and like during that bad period too, we had a bass player named Scott Williams, and he left the band, but then he got into a situation where he was killed.
Oh shit.
And so it was really, that was a really bad like vibe in the band. But there was a new guy named Scott who entered the band, played bass. And then the vibe between like Scott, Brian, Tommy, like the new Scott and Brian, Tommy, just, it kind of like finally came together, I think, with Inevitable Collapse. And things kind of got more like on track and more focused.
Yeah, and it's been like
You
15
know, because
years.
I just feel like things were just kind of like uneasy. Nothing bad about like the previous records, like Confrontation, all that. I just feel like there was just a little unstableness there. You know, it was like really unstable. Things were kind of scattered just because of everything that was going on with that band.
Yeah.
And, you know, Inevitable was just like, it was like, that was it. That was the point. I really like that record personally. You know, it has a lot of personal aspects to it, but just with the writing and the way it was all approached was really fucking cool.
Yeah. And it has been 15 years since that album. Like what's the status of Soylent Green? Would you ever consider making another album, or are you just like solely just focused with Goatwhore?
Well, song's always been a complicated machine. And, you know, everybody's always been at one point doing something. Like Brian, you know, was also doing I Hate God. Now, you know, at one point Tommy got in the Crowbar, so that was going on. And I was in Goatwhore. I'm in Goatwhore as well. So I think that kind of strained it a lot too. But also, you know, people like Brian now, you know, he has a family. He has 3 kids. He's like a fucking amazing dad. It's pretty fucking cool. And Tommy's been really busy with Crowbar. We've discussed like trying to do like a few shows here and there. Writing, I'm not sure about, but I know Brian does like, you know, he still plays guitar at home and stuff and he fiddles with things. So he has ideas and concepts. It's just trying to get everybody like on the same page. And like I said, being older is just it's a little harder to kind of make that happen, especially with everyone's schedules. But we have talked about at least maybe trying to do a few shows to kind of, and maybe if we did a few shows that we get things like on a path to kind of maybe work on something new. You know, I can't promise anything. I don't. It's a hard. It's like I said. Someone's a complicated machine. It's always been a complicated machine. It's always been its own unique thing, you know. And when you meet people, like even now, like then is the same as now with people that like Soylent. Is either people they like Soylent or people don't like Soylent. There's no like in between thing. It's just like diehard Soylent or no Soylent. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
it's definitely always been a unique kind of thing, and I cherish it big time. It was a huge part of my life. You know, we did a lot of really cool. We did a lot of cool shit with that band. You know, I mean, dude, we got to play and open for Pantera in arenas, which was really interesting.
I never knew that.
You know,
wow.
so Phil was like a fan of some of the, like he was a fan of some of the earlier Soylent stuff, and he asked us to do like, we did one. It was like Pantera, Anthrax, and Cold Chamber, and we played that. And then we did one. It was Pantera and Clutch, and we played some shows with them, like 4 shows in like Texas or something like that. And we did this other one with them, and it was like 2 shows in Florida and a show in Mississippi at the Gulf Coast Coliseum. But yeah, that was, you know, I stop and I look back and I'm like, holy shit, you know, we did some really remarkable stuff. We played a huge festival in Japan called Beast Feast Fest. And it was like Slayer, Pantera, like all these fucking big hitters back in the day. And we played that. And I was like, yeah, you know, we did a lot of really cool fucking things. You know, there's a lot of things that bands would be like, shit, we never, you know, we would love to do something like that.
Awesome. And kind of like finishing up with the next few Goatwhore albums. Next up is Carving Out the Eyes of God. Like, I love this album. In my opinion, I think it's the most varied Goatwhore album. Like, tell me about like the making of this album.
Yeah, that record is straight to the point. You know, it was like it was firing on all cylinders big time because it was just, we knew what we wanted to do. And Sammy was on that quest for the guitar sound, and so was Eric, because Sammy said how much he was disappointed in it and what happened with the Haunting Curse. But it was just, went in there, did that, and those songs were just fucking solid. They were just attacking. Every one of those songs were like full on fucking attack. So, the the whole experience with doing that record was like way different than a Haunting Curse. It was like, well, like I said too, being that we were with Rutan once already, going in there, it was comfortable. So you knew what was going on when you walked in there. And so just going in there and doing that record, and it was just like, bam, this is how it's going to be. And bam, these are the songs, doom, 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 doom. And it was just hitting, everybody was there. Zach and Sammy were on fire with shit, not that they're never on fire. They both do amazing jobs, but like that, I mean, that's early days. I mean, because Zach's first record with Goatwhore was a Haunting Curse.
Yeah.
He was younger, and, Carving was the next one. It's cool because with like Haunting, Carving, Blood for the Master, as you go down the line of the records, you can see Sammy and Zach's growth as musicians and their relationship as far as how, like, the writing structures of songs.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite songs is, of course, the opening song, "Apocalyptic Havoc." Definitely one of my favorite Goatwhore songs. It's interesting. It was actually featured in a Saints Row the Third. How did they ended up hooking up with reaching out to you guys and say, "Hey, we want your song in our game"?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, just, I don't know. Sometimes I guess somebody involved with, one of the game companies or something, and they're into metal and they're listening to stuff, and they're like, hey, let's reach out to this band and see about using a song from them. Like, so we had that song in that. We also had a song in that game. It was like a remake of, I think it was called Splatterhouse. And then we also had a song in a horror movie, Night of the Demons, the remake of Night of the Demons.
Yeah.
There was a song in that too. And we were on a car stereo in that series Treme that was on TV. And then also, what's that? Man, it was like a Sherlock Holmes type TV series. And we had a song there. And then there was another series about that, like you take a pill and your like intelligence gets better or stuff like that. I don't even remember anymore. There's quite a few of them actually. It's kind of cool actually that we've had all those little things. So luckily enough, we were on somebody's radar as far as, they were into metal. They came across us. They asked us to use the song or whatever, which is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like everything about this album is just great. Like I mentioned before, very varied. Like Apocalyptic Havoc has that kind of like punky overtones, and then you also got like songs like Provoking the Ritual of Death, which is just very almost kind of like melodic, and then even which one is it? I don't know, just like To Mourn and Forever Wander Through Forgotten Starways has almost kind of like the kind of like Dismember kind of like riffs as well as
yeah. It's like a melodic, like, and the vocals weren't anything like that crazy, just kind of like a spoken word kind of thing over certain parts, but let the music kind of breathe a little more and open up. Yeah, there was a lot of really cool variations of stuff on that record. Like I said, I feel like it was more like fine-tuned because Sammy and Zach's relationship grew even more. The way they wrote stuff together evolved, and then it brought it to that whole next level,
Yeah. And then the next album, Blood for the Master, I love this album. I know last year was the 10-year anniversary. So how do you feel about this album? Pretty much like now 11 years later.
I really like that record. I do think the guitars are a little dark on that record, and that's a record too where I feel like
it's very
so the
sharp
next
sounding.
record, Constricting Rage of the Merciless. I feel like if the guitar tone on Constricting Rage was on Blood for the Master, it would definitely change the element of Blood for the Master as well. But then that's, I keep saying I would change it, but it's like, but that's what makes the record. Even despite any issues or we didn't go down the path we thought we were going down, that's what makes that particular record. That's what Blood for the Master is. And, it's just, I guess it's just me going through going, yeah, the guitars just sound a little bit more dark. They don't sound as like snarly and have that like chainsaw effect like they did on Carving. But the music was really good. Everything was good. It was just, I guess it's just like a personal thing. And everything about the record like is fucking solid, musically, the performances from everyone across the board. It's just like, it's like I said, it's just rooted like the next step, the growth. Sammy and Zach's relationship and writing, their next step in growth after, Carving Out the Eyes of God. It's got a lot of really good written songs on that record. And like I said, the guitar tone, I'm like, it doesn't bother me that bad. Sometimes I just juggle things in my head. I'm like, wow, I wonder what it would sound like with this guitar tone on this record. But basically, that is what Blood for the Master is. So it's like, why even bother, going into this realm where I keep saying, change the guitar sound or something like that. But that record, even like the idea with the artwork and everything, it started to like evolve more. And that's the first time we started using Jordan Barlow to do art. And the whole layout.
Amazing album cover.
Yeah, I mean, and it unfolds, it's like it's only like a piece of a whole piece that folds out. So there was like a lot of concept going into that and everything behind the record, the lyrics and stuff like that. And it was like, yeah, see, so it kind of like it all connects. It's all one main piece.
Yeah. Who did the artwork? It looks amazing.
Jordan Barlow.
Wow. Wow, it's just amazing. So I want to get that back in.
But yeah, so that record had like a lot of elements of not only with the music, but the art and everything, like all revolving together. Like I think we were like at that point coming into more solidity with the band of like going into a direction of this is like, so for Goatwhore for me is like these stages where we were influenced by things, but then at one point things start coming to the aspect of Goatwhore's coming into who Goatwhore is. And it isn't this thing of like all these little broken up influences. It becomes, this is what Goatwhore is, and this is what Goatwhore sounds like. And then we can kind of take that element and branch off a little bit here and there and try new things, experiment a little bit, but overall bring it into this is what Goatwhore sounds like. This is how they come across. This is the element of it. And that's where I think definitely Blood for the Master is that point where it puts it in that position.
Yeah. And then your next album, Constricting Rage of the Merciless. I love this album. And funny enough, this was the album that got me into Goatwhore and how I discovered you guys. So how do you feel about this album? And I know next year is also going to be the 10-year anniversary.
I love that record. That record's awesome, man. Like that, for a follow-up for Blood for the Master, I think that record's so fucking awesome. And it's really, it's very intense, but intense in a different way than like, Carving. Like Carving was more like straightforward, intense with like, like that more like a caveman style kind of drumming, where Constricting was more precise, intense, and it was more focused with the preciseness with how things were. And I mean, like I was saying before, Sammy and Zach, the growth from Haunting to Carving to Blood for the Master to Constricting. You can see that whole evolution and that growth just by listening to those records in a row. You can see how those dudes came together as a unit and just started to expand and get better and better as they went along. Like their relationship in the whole writing universe and how they perceive things was awesome, And then, we also have like James Harvey getting in the band as well, like at one point, and his elements as a bass player, like he was a really great writer too. And him with Sammy and Zach and how they put together things and wrote stuff was really an amazing thing to witness. But like I said, as a listener, you can go through each one of those records and you can hear the evolution, you can hear the writing structure of stuff and how it all evolves and comes to a point.
Yeah, and I still like one of my favorite songs I love is Bearing Teeth for Revolt. I love that. That's just very kind of like that kind of like rock and roll kind of vibe to it. And I know that song was also on a CBS show called Elementary. So
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about earlier, the Sherlock Holmes thing.
Yeah.
Yes. The Elementary, that's it. Elementary.
Yeah, I just forgot about it till now. It's another great song, great way to help promote Goatwhore. Or maybe they'll be like, "What was that song?"
I didn't even remember the series. You just said it, and I was like, "Yes, that's the one. That's the one." The Sherlock Holmes one.
And
but
also,
it was. And the thing I liked about that too is, I mean, we've always had like that element because we have that Motorhead influence,
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things in there, that come up, like, like in like Apocalyptic Havoc from, Carving Out the Eyes of God, to When Steel and Bone Meet on Blood for the Master, to Bearing Teeth for Revolt. It's like this. It's this aspect of traditional heavy metal mixed with like a rock and roll, or even to the point of where they started like Dark Throne and bands. They did that thing like the black and roll kind of aspect. It's like black metal mixed with kind of like a rock and roll aspect to it, and so that was kind of like imprinted and put into there as well, like that black and roll thing, or like I said, like the Motorhead or D-beat kind of stuff, kind of like influence thrown in there to give it more of that like rock element to it.
Yeah.
So, and that's where a lot of songs, with Constricting, it really can't, like, the writing was like off the hook on that fucking record.
Yeah. Yeah, some other sick songs like Fucked by Satan. Another sick song. That's
yeah. The thing I like too on that record is the fact that, going from songs like that, like going from, the opener, I think, is Poisonous Existence, but like that song is more like, it's a really good structured song, but then you take something like FBS, or you take something like Bearing Teeth for Revolt, where it's a good structured song, but it's more a simpler based idea, more like that rock and roll idea to it, and have that variation on the record to where it can go to something that was like Poison Existence to something like Fuck by Satan,
Yeah.
Because Fuck by Satan is more like straightforward, kind of old school sounding, and that's like, I even did that like lyrically for each song. I kind of focused more like the lyrics. This song feels more old school, so I'm going to write lyrics that are more focused on like an old school kind of element. The way I lay out the vocals will be like that.
Yeah.
And then like a song like Poison Existence it was more like rooted in like a more serious like metal song, and so the lyrics would be more serious and deeper aspect to it.
Yeah, totally. And I love how you all like I mentioned before, like you all have like those different like style feels with every Goatwhore song, but you definitely don't try to do something that makes people like turn their heads, but you still try to still try to have what Goatwhore is, and just definitely don't try to forget that.
Yeah. Now, like I said, like for Blood for the Master, I felt that's when we came into like, instead of like in the past, it's like, okay, you can pick out like all little influences, but at one point our little influences become what Goatwhore is. And for Blood for the Master is when everything kind of seeded itself for that. And then it would just, from there, you would just build off of that, and everything would be Goatwhore. You would still be able to pull out the influences, but it was a little bit more tighter about, this is what Goatwhore is. And then when it went into Constricting, it was even more so. And even down the line, keeps solidifying.
Yeah. And then the next album, Vengeful Ascension. I love this album. What was it like going from this to this?
That was a pretty, I don't know, I don't want to say it was like experimental, but I guess for us it was sort of experimental because it was like a different kind of like a little approach as far as, well, we had a couple of things different. We
Yeah.
went to a different studio. We had a different producer engineer. We had Jared Pritchard involved with us. And he was our sound engineer for a while. And then we were just talking to him and we decided that, you know, let's take a person that's in the live setting and see how they can pull out what we sound like and put it onto an album. You know, being used to how we sound live, can we pull that in a studio somehow? And then that's when we decided to go to like Earth Analog and do it on 2-inch tape and try to just like go just a different route in general, you know. And it was unique. It was definitely a different step. It was really cool. Like I said, our relationship with Jared was great because he had already been out with us a bunch, so we all knew each other. And the guy that owned the studio, Matt Talbot, he was really awesome as well. Really fucking helpful. And you know, we just went down that path and just decided to do something a little different, make a change in things. You know, nothing, there was no bad blood with Eric or anything like that. It was just time to just try something a little different. And, you know, and it's not only that, but even like musically, like even the title track, Vengeful Ascension, is kind of different from stuff that we had done in the past.
Yeah.
And Sammy was more, like, I remember when we were writing, he was more into a lot more like traditional metal type stuff, like Dokken and things like that. And so a lot of that like traditional metal was influencing some of the writing styles, you know, even though it's like, you know, it's death metal, black metal, like whatever, black and death metal, whatever, how you want to put what we do. But it did have like a tinge of a little different kind of style to it, you know, like, because I think at the time, like what influences were going on with like Sammy and Zach and that too was like James, at that point, James was like, the band was kind of half and half with a bass player. TA was with us, but he was our touring bass player. And James was like our studio bass player because James, he had a family, he was finishing up school, he was sorting a lot of things out, but him and Sammy would get together and still write things. So we had like there was like a little weird like juggling act going on there. Yeah. And so James played on the record because he had wrote a bunch of stuff with Sammy at that.
Yeah.
And so it was weird because James wouldn't be there sometimes for the writing, and then he'd come in town because he was kind of going back and forth, and he, you know, was finishing up school and everything like that. So there was a lot of him in and out. So, you know, that would probably affect the writing slightly because then it would just fall mainly in Zach and Sammy's lap as far as the music goes. And then when James come in, he would put in a few pieces here and there, or he'd sit with Sammy and they'd work out some things. So it was a lot of mixture as far as writing goes on that record because of the element of James being kind of in and out at that point.
Yeah.
But I really do. There's a lot of songs on that record I really, really fucking enjoy. And not only that, on that record, I think we managed to play every song on that record live at one point during the touring cycle.
Yeah, really? I never knew that.
Yeah.
And I think probably, in my opinion, the best aspect of this album is sort of like pretty much also like the doom laden tracks. Like I feel like the pacing and sort of like the way the songs are arranged is really great, especially in like the first 3/4 of here. There's each of the slower songs is followed by a faster track, which makes the kind of like the album almost formulaic. I feel like all the songs are very memorable and catchy. And I think, in my opinion, the best song is, of course, the last song on here, which are "Those Who Deny God's Will." I think it's probably, in my opinion, the best song on the entire album.
Yeah, I mean, they have a lot of good. Like I really like Chaos Arcane on that record a lot.
Another sick song.
And but yeah, like you said, like the doomy songs, like Decayed Omen Reborn. I mean, that song we've been playing that one live lately, and it just comes across really heavy, dude, really heavy. And I always thought it was like we kind of stayed away from it a bit like when that record first came out, and I was like, we should play this live because it's definitely the impact of it and the way it's like the drum work in it and the way Zach accents things with like toms. It makes everything even that more monumental within the song, you know.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of really cool fucking written stuff on that record, and it's I don't know if like because I really don't ponder this a lot, but it never really got a lot of attention. But I just really didn't. I don't really delve into that kind of aspect of the industry much because I just like putting the stuff out and then just touring on it and doing what I have to do. But I did notice that it didn't get a lot of attention at the time. But I think sometimes bands, they have some records that come out and they don't really get noticed until later on down the line. Because I've noticed a lot more people are like talking about that record now and they weren't really as familiar with. I think it kind of like maybe got overlooked. Like I said, I think every band comes to this point where a record gets overlooked or it gets pushed on the back burner for some reason. But then down the line, people come across and they go, what happened here? Why did I miss this release? Where did this release go missing in the whole scheme of things? You know, maybe there were newer bands out that were, you know, I mean, they got so much stuff that comes out. It's hard to keep track of like records, you know?
Yeah.
So it's, I really can't explain it, but it's cool because like I've noticed lately, like people are like circling back around to it, and people that didn't really realize anything about it, and they're bringing it up, which is cool, you know,
Yeah.
because and like we're saying, it's got a lot of really great stuff to it. It's got a lot of really great written songs, and that definitely doesn't mean just because it didn't get like the attention that other records got doesn't mean it's bad or it's worse than any record. It's very powerful in so many ways, you know. I guess in the artwork too. The artwork on that was pretty crazy because the cover is only a small piece of a whole thing that folds out to a huge piece, you know.
Yeah. Right. Well,
I think that's a lost art, though. Yeah,
yeah. God damn, that's another.
I think it's a
amazing.
lost art.
Yeah, really. I never knew this.
And Jordan Barlow did that. So Jordan Barlow did Blood for the Master, Constricting Rage, and Vengeful Ascension, and the new.
Which we'll get there, but this, like I said, I love this album. Like, I think this is the first time I ever saw Goatwhore was on this album cycle. You did that show at the Drunken Unicorn in Atlanta, with our boys in Withered and our boys in Cloak. That was a sick show, and I think I've seen almost every Goatwhore show in Atlanta since then.
Yeah. I remember that show. That show was great, man.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that. And of course, like your latest album, Angels Hung from the Arches of Heaven, which came out in last October, I thought was a pretty good album. But how has the overall feedback and response been for this album?
They're getting a really good response from that record. They got that record has a lot of mixed. I feel like Angels has a lot of mixture of like definitely the last three, like definitely Vengeful, Constricting, and Blood for the Master. It has a lot of that, but then it has some newer little elements, some newer different approaches Sammy kind of took. I mean, like, so Sammy wrote, you know, he didn't really have a lot like writing wise from like other members this time. Like Zach and him pretty much mostly on it, but him on a lot of stuff, like especially, you know, the final track on the record. Sammy put that together on his own. It was like during the pandemic and stuff like that. He put that together, and it's pretty epic, you know. It's definitely like a different like aspect and a different zone. I mean, it's like I think it's like 6 minutes long, so it's definitely like one of like the longest songs we've done.
Yeah.
So, but it's got that record has a lot of like mixture of like the last three records, but also like some new elements to it. I really like the whole overall sound. And on this record, once again, we went to a studio in Louisiana because at the time the whole pandemic thing was going on. We had to find like a studio where we could kind of like create our own bubble or whatever the hell that was going on at that time. And there was a studio like north of here in Bogalusa, Louisiana, called Studio in the Country. And it's famous for like back in the day, like Kansas and all recorded there and stuff like that. And when you walk in the studio, it's like you went through a time like loop, and it reminds you of like the 70s, so like late 70s. And I think like Marilyn Manson did some stuff there, Nine Inch Nails back in the day too, some other bands. But so we went there and we had Jared Pritchard again with us as a producer engineer. And then we had, for mixing it, it went to Kurt Ballou at God City Studios. And Kurt plays guitar in Converge, but he also does a lot of records as well. Really, he's done a really great job with many records. And we were at one point talking about going to record with him, but because of the time period, what was going on, we had to, we went with the whole thing with Bogalusa and, had Jarrett involved in everything. And then he mixed it. And, it's just the way it sounds is I think it really comes across really strong. It's got a really powerful sound. I think everyone involved with that record did a fucking amazing job.
Yeah, like of course, like there was like a 5-year gap between Vengeful Ascension and this album, and of course, obviously, I think that the pandemic sort of like played a role in that. But did it just pretty much, was it come together smoothly still overall?
Wait, what?
Pretty much like I know there was like a 5-year gap between Vengeful Ascension and this. How was, of course, the pandemic had played like a role in the making of this, or did you want to try to like make that like forget about that and just focus on this album?
Well, I think naturally the pandemic would influence it anyway. You know what I'm saying? Like, because you were writing, and then this whole thing happens, and life kind of comes to like a halt, and people are kind of stuck in certain areas. I think that it's not, and you say, okay, well, we're still going to write, but it's going to be a little different. Like, well, you're going to do it on a computer. You're going to send it across to the next person that lives somewhere else, and then pass things back and forth. I think it's a natural influence that you can't prevent. See what I'm saying? Like it's inevitable, but it did cause like a delay in like recording. And not only that, we really didn't want to record as soon because I was watching bands put records out during that, and they put a record out, and then all of a sudden, because you couldn't tour. So in this style of music and in this line of music, you got to be able to get out on the road when you put a record out. If you don't, it just there's so many releases that come out, it gets buried. And we're like, well, we don't want to put anything out and not be able to go on tour. So we kind of also halted shit a little bit. Like we made sure we kind of push things and make it fall into a spot to when it comes out where we're able to kind of be on the road or go out on the road.
Yeah, and of course, like I feel
basically it lost like, let's say 2 years or so, 2.5, 3 years in that time period, because of everything, and you couldn't go out. So forcing a push of not letting something come out or trying to push going into the studio so it doesn't have to come out so soon, that was, it's like a delay. It's like a weird glitch that where like all this shit happened, and then all of a sudden it's like, because it's funny because when you talk to people about stuff and you go, yeah, man, I remember like 2 years ago, and you're like, yeah, 2 years ago we were kind of still stuck not being able to do certain things. And they're like, oh shit, that's right. So that was like 4 years ago. And you're like, yeah, so it was like 4 years ago. So it's like this weird glitch that when you look at the element of time, it's weird. It creates this like void because things weren't going on, or if they were going on, they got lost and stuff because bands couldn't tour, people couldn't go out places. Bands were putting out things, but it just never, when they put something out a month or so later, it was like it was on to the next thing because they couldn't be out on the road pushing.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a pretty strong endorsement meant for the album. How do you feel like having the extra time impacted the lyrical themes and the overall themes as well as the process of recording?
You know, it's weird. Sometimes having more time is good, but sometimes having more time is bad. Because
Yeah.
sometimes having more time makes you more analytical about it, and you think about things a little more. And sometimes when you're in the heat of the moment and forced, sometimes that whole element brings out something better. So I think it's like this weird balancing thing you try to like sort out. You know, you're like, you don't want yourself to go too far down the rabbit hole of like trying to make this shit proper. But at
Yeah.
the same time, you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you do something you're not happy with,
Yeah.
you know? So you
Can't
got to try to
half-ass it.
find this like weird little balance of like, yeah, of where it goes. Because like I said, it works in both directions. You know, you could pull something off that's like short. Like I've had songs where I wrote lyrics for them, like shit. Like I had a lot of songs I wrote lyrics for like days before I recorded them, you know, or a couple of weeks before I recorded them. And I've had songs where I had more time to write the lyrics, and sometimes the lyrics that I wrote in the short amount of time were fucking way better than the ones I had more time for. So I think you get caught in these little weird things where sometimes you overly think something, and then you're like, because you're overly thinking, you think it's coming out great, but in the end, you're like, that just didn't come out as I thought it would.
Yeah.
But then the little quick one you did, you're like, holy shit, this one sounds great. So, like I said, it's just a weird balance in the way things come across, and you can't really like trick yourself in a sense, you know, because I think you get sometimes you need to stop yourself and be able to get up and go, I need to step away from this because I've been involved with it too long, and listen to it over and over and over, and now it's just like your head starts to play tricks on you. Like, need to step away, go do something else, clear the head, and come back to it. And that
Yeah.
usually helps like refocus and be like, all right, this is a terrible idea. Let's change this. Let's do this. Let's do that. You know?
Yeah. And of course, or it's like last year was of course 25 years of Goatwhore as a band, which is pretty much long in metal years, and I know you've all accomplished a lot. Like, how do you feel like extreme metal has changed since you first started making? Do you see any like positives and negatives at all, or any differences from where you started to where you are, where it is today here in 2023?
Uh, I really don't see any negatives. You know, I mean, there's always going to be bands I dislike. You know, just and not dislike just for the hell of it. It's just not something I'm like into musically. But when I stop and I look at like bands that are doing stuff now, I mean, I can be like a crabby old person and be like, well, yeah, this band reminds me of this from when I was growing up. But you got to understand, there's a younger band, and maybe they're listening to something that I was into when I was younger, and they're just getting the feel for it, and which is good because a younger generation out there and everything that's going on, it keeps the cycle going. You don't want it to just die off. You know, you want it to go. So I think it's all positive. All these bands that are doing things and the way they're approaching it, their influences. If they like older, like if they're all into shit that I was into when I was a kid, that's great. You know, revitalize it, attack it in a different way. Like I said, every head, like me listening to somebody like Bolt Thrower when I was growing up, to listen to Bolt Thrower now, to someone younger listening to Bolt Thrower now, that's three different aspects on how you perceive what Bolt Thrower was doing. And then your influence will come off three different ways from that. So that's great. You know, if a younger person is into something with grindcore, death metal, or anything, and they're going back to the roots of stuff, and that's what is influencing them now, and they're coming off like those bands, I'm not going to sit there and go, oh, well, you know, I grew up listening to shit like that. I don't need to hear this. No, that's needed because there's a whole young generation out there that needs to be turned on to that, and that's what they're doing.
All right.
And it's the evolution process, and it's keeping the cycle going, and that's a positive thing. We need to have that.
Yeah. And kind of have two more questions for you, if that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're this far. What we're like an hour and a half or something. I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much. We've been talking for a while. Wow,
Yeah.
wow. I mean, I could go for another 2 hours. I'm just kidding. But kind of like coming from New Orleans, because I feel like the metal scene has like a lot of great bands. Like, of course, Goatwhore, I Hate God, Down, Exhorter, Crowbar, Kingdom of Sorrow, Superjoint, Ritual. How do you feel like the scene over there has grown over the years? I feel like there's a lot of cool bands coming out from there these days.
Yeah, no, there is. Dude, I'm excited about a lot of the bands that are coming out from here right now. It's like, because too, it's unique. There's none of them are like duplicates of like Goatwhore or Crowbar or I God or Pantera Down, any of that stuff. That's been like influence here. They're all kind of doing their own little thing. Like we have this band Heraklion. It's a little 3-piece band. It's like mixture of older kind of death metal. Like it reminds me of like kind of like early death mixed with some like autopsy and some other little different old elements. But it's some younger dudes that are into a lot of like older stuff like that, and they're incorporating it and basically taking how they're influenced by it and putting it out at this point. And then you have a band like Brat. It's like a grind, like power violence type band, and they have a chick singer, and she has like blonde hair, and they do these like Britney Spears samples and weird shit in between. But
Wow.
it's weird in a way, but it's unique and it's its own thing. It's definitely like its own approach. And then we have somebody like Morbid Torment. It's more traditional kind of like that thrash, that blackened thrash kind of metal type stuff. And then we have Abysmal Lord, who is more like that kind of war metal, like kind of like Blasphemy meets Revenge, type thing. So we have a lot of different things that are going on here, and it's really cool. It's fucking awesome. They got a lot of bands that are coming up in the scene that are fucking amazing. There's like punk bands that are fucking awesome. There's a bunch of shit that's going on here right now that's really cool.
Yeah. And kind of in the end, to wrap things up, what's next for Goatwhore? I know you had the new album, which had been out since last October. Have you all started like working ideas for the next Goatwhore album?
Yeah. I mean, that's always a process. Even when we're at the point of doing a new record, we have other stuff that's like on the shelf that we're working that either hasn't made it yet, writing wise, to be on that record, or it's other like Sammy's got tons of riffs piled up, and then we kind of go through all that stuff and kind of lay out, and then he has new riffs, every other day or whatever. He has stuff that he just kind of tracks things and keeps them. Like in the early days, we just used to have like a jam box, record the riffs, and then sit down and like fish for riffs, like play through the tape and pick out riffs and kind of put songs together. But now, because of technology, you can just drop it in a computer and kind of lay it out and kind of get an idea and then start building it off of that. But yeah, he's got like a ton of riffs, so that process is always there. And I'm always like, I write things down all the time. I just have notebooks or little notes on my phone or pieces of scrap paper where I have an idea and I'll write some things down. So I just have piles of little like things that I pull from, and then sometimes I'll get like an idea. I'll say, all right, I'm gonna write a song about this, and then I'll dig through the pile and I'll find little parts that are associated with the idea, and then put those in and then build around that. So we have like stuff that we're always fiddling. I think that's just natural though for people in bands. They have these little ideas here and there, and they just, whether they record it on like their phone, on the computer, on Jambox somewhere or whatever, or write it down somewhere, I think that's something that's just an element of being like a musician in general. It's like keeping notes of all these little ideas.
Awesome. So before we go, I just want to thank you for chatting with me. It was great to be able to talk with you about your history and stuff.
Yeah, no problem.
Is there just any final words you want to say to close out this interview?
Um, this is the part that's the hardest for me. I just, I always want to tell people there's a lot of bands out there. There's a lot of things to listen to. Support bands, help them out. Go buy their stuff online. Their music. If they got some kind of Bandcamp page, or they got their stuff on Spotify. You can listen and they gain some kind of monetary value from that. Whatever, anything to kind of help them along. There's so much stuff, but don't. My main thing is don't, with the access there is nowadays, as far as like online streaming, Bandcamp, Spotify, anything like that, YouTube. Before you decide you want to make a decision about a band because you heard someone else talk about it, go ahead and go listen to it. It doesn't take long to listen to like 4 minutes of a song to kind of get your own idea. You don't have to like be part of some group of people because they all said, I don't really like that band because it's like this, or because the labeling of genres is really weird. Like somebody, if you say something's black metal and this person says, well, I don't like black metal. Like we've been labeled black metal for a long time. And I don't really consider us like a full on black metal band. Like I consider like Emperor black metal. I consider Watain black metal.
Yeah.
I feel like Goatwhore has a huge influence with black metal, but we have a lot more aspect. Like when people ask me, well, what do you label your band as? I say, kind of like extreme heavy metal, really, because we have a lot of different elements. We have like death metal, we have thrash metal, we have D-beat shit, we have black metal, we have blackened thrash, or however you want to call it.
Yeah.
But I think when people talk about stuff and they put a label on it and it like turns someone off, it's like, why don't you just go listen first to see? Because sometimes what somebody thinks is black metal might not necessarily be black metal to you. So, or the aspect of what you think black metal is, or if somebody thinks this is death metal, and then you hear it and you're like, well, that's not really what I don't really consider that fully death metal. So at least just go listen to it. Go listen to it. Like when we go on tours and it's with a newer band that I never heard, I'm like, I'm gonna go check this out. I need to see what's going on with this. I want to see what the band's like. I want to see, what they do. And then when I get on the road and I meet the guys and we talk, and I'm sort of familiar with what they do. I don't want to be like, I don't know anything about what your fucking band does. But it's like the access to it, like especially coming from me being older, of course, and we used to tape trade and all these means of trying to get music and listen to music. The access to it is so much easier. Why not take the few minutes to go listen to it, see what it really is? You might find something you never even knew you liked.
Yeah, I agree. So everybody, Ben from Goatwhore, we'll see you next time.